Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This particular testimony is intended for the House of Commons of Canada, for the regulatory agencies, for the superintendents of Canadian banks, superintendents of world banks, law enforcement agencies, and anybody and everybody that has to do with bank fraud, stock exchange fraud, gold system fraud, and fraud to the government of Canada. The particular affairs commenced in the year 1994, shortly after LAC Minerals lost a fundamental decision in Canada that set legal jurisprudence. The case was called LAC versus Corona. In the LAC versus Corona case, jurisdiction of the Ontario Superior Court of Appeals and Ontario Supreme Court decided that any business that is done in Canada, it could be with a handshake or in a formal exchange of documentation that didn't have to be a formal contract. LAC versus Corona jurisprudence protects my business with Barrick Gold Corporation, achieved in Chile in the year 1996. Out of the ashes of LAC Minerals, after it lost the decision of Ontario, LAC Minerals in Chile used to enjoy the deposit El Indio. And north of El Indio, in the mountain range, there was a little known deposit called first Proyecto Nevada and then Mina Pascua. Mina Pascua was born in the Toronto Stock Exchange TSE as Mina Pascua Prospectus in 1994-1995. In Canada, it is a crime to deliver a false prospectus in the stock exchange. And it's a violation of the Criminal Code of Canada under Section 400, bracket 1, peddling a false prospectus. From the onset, Barrick Gold Corporation set out to deliver to the markets, financial establishment, banks, a false prospectus that was improperly backed by titles of concessions of salts and nitrates that LAC Minerals sold to Barrick Gold Corporation in 1994. The large mineral concessions were called Amarillos 1 to 3000, implying by its name that under the old code, which those concessions were registered, the concessions were 3,000 parcels of 1 hectare each. The truth of the matter is that in 1994, when Barrick acquired the concessions Amarillos 1 to 3,000, they were under 800 hectares of land. And still, they were concessions of salts and nitrates, so reported by the National Service of Geology and Mining as late as 2011 to us in information that we presented to the Chilean courts in that regard. In the year 1995, I received a story from one of my knowledgeable miners of the mountain that he had been assisting Barrick Gold Corporation teams in exploration of the properties that Barrick Gold Corporation had acquired from LAC Minerals, especially in the Mina Pascua area, Proyecto Nevada at the time. He told me and confided to me that the geologists of Barrick had in fact taken UTM coordinates and had GPS themselves a new mining property to be registered in Chile that was located in Argentina. I asked very clearly to the miners to identify the areas And how did they know that it was Argentina? And it was known to them that there was a border demarker points in certain hills that belonged to Argentina, and that's where the Barrick Gold Corporation geologists were passed into Argentina. I was later able to corroborate that information through a study of the mining property of Barrick Gold Corporation and the payments of said concessions onto the treasury of the government of Chile. And we discovered that they had altered the payments to the Treasury Department, and they had increased the amount of mining property with new names and UTMs that effectively did correspond to the country of Argentina, which in effect invalidated everything that they did, and they were trading at that moment in the stock exchange in Canada without a valid title or property to respond for their Mina Pascua prospectus, let alone that the prospectus did not allow Barrick Gold Corporation to sell gold, only salts and nitrates. Understanding the nature of the deficiency and the defect of Barrick title, I laid concessions in the year 1995, first in the name of Hugo Osvaldo Garcia Diaz, and in 1996 I relayed those concessions in the name of Francisco Rodolfo Villar Garcia, or Rodolfo Francisco Villar Garcia, my mining property agent since 1994, years before I met or knew Barrick Gold Corporation. BR went to the mountain, and as is normal in Chile, the people who have mining engineers or trustees for mining property, he laid concessions on my behalf under Article 41 of the Chilean Mining Code that says the person who invests is the owner, not necessarily the engineer that processes the mining concessions and do the day-to-day keeping. I went to meet with the president of Barrick Gold Corporation at the time, John W. Lill, Canadian citizen. And I agreed to business under the jurisprudence of Lack versus Corona. We were both Canadian citizens, and we shook hands. And we exchanged documentation in the project. And Barrick made a promise to enter into contract with me, to pay me a fair price of millions of dollars, and as well to deliver to me a gold royalty that was similar to what some of my peers in Chile were receiving at El Indio mine. Let it be known that El Indio mine used to belong to my family, but we also lost it in a contractual malfeasance and the power of Lack Minerals, the company that was punished in Canada with the Lack versus Corona jurisprudence. Let it be known that today the principal executives of Barrick Gold Corporation in Chile are indeed and in fact ex-executives of Lack Minerals. Two of the most prominent, together with John W. Lill, who was president of Barrick Chile until 1997, are the Canadian lawyer Laura Phyllis Maria Emery, aka Laura Emery, and the British auditor Kevin Atkinson Tier. Barrick Gold Corporation in the year 1996 already did not have a project, and they had to reinvent themselves by acquiring, and I will be acquiring my concessions, 8,600 hectares, under a contract that read the price of $20 equivalent in US dollars for 8,600 hectares of gold, silver, and copper, roughly around 32 Stanley Park in size for Vancouver, British Columbia, or way larger than downtown Toronto. $20? And then the company comes out to the markets. And how did they manage to get that property into the markets? In 1997, Barrick had a negative audit from Coopers & Lybrand in East Coast, Newfoundland. And it was rejected, the 1996-97 audit that corresponds to my transaction and the spending of the Chilean monies in Peru to take over Pierina mine. And Cooper's Lybrand was correct. The audit would not pan out eventually and over the years, but it was corrected so that Price Waterhouse acquired Cooper's Lybrand and became Price Waterhouse Coopers, and they washed and laundered the crime. And Price Waterhouse Coopers cleaned the books of Barrick, just like they've done in Chile. Not only clean, fabrication of books, fabrication of titles. It is already known that in Canada, under Section 400, brackets 1 of the Criminal Code, anybody who peddles a false prospectus will suffer 10 years and 1 day in jail. But Barrick resolved and obtained the support of very strong politicians of Canada, and amongst them, no less than the chairman of the International Advisory Board, Brian Mulroney. Significant individuals from other governments, including the US, Germany, bankers. Barrick got flooded with elite names and power. What they did not have was the gold. They didn't own the largest flag asset. So what Barrick set out to do, it was a two-track. They wanted me to disappear from the face of the earth. They robbed my identity and they assassinated my character. In the year 2000, as a matter of fact, Rodolfo Villar came back to me asking me for help because Barrick and Minera Homestake of Australia were hot over his back and decimating him in concessions. And I said, Villar, whatever happened to Mina Pascua in 1997 because you disappeared? And Villar responded, my life was threatened by Barrick Gold Corporation and they paid me 30 million pesos to run away from you because they told me that you would kill me or they would kill me, as they took Mina Pascua for $20 in a fake contract. And I say, Villar, could you please roll that back for me? They did a fake contract of $20. How was that achieved? Villar says, as you know, Jorge, you told me that I could attend the meetings of Barrick and I was appointed there. I was told that there was going to be a contract and they took me to the notary public before it closed and they had me signed that contract under the understanding that we all were going to pay millions of dollars, but they told me that they couldn't pay me right there and then until accounting department oversaw the contract and all the signatures being correct. They would get back to me. They didn't. And when I went to check at the notary public where the contract was subscribed, I found that Barrick used a lawyer in Chile that was your enemy at the time, and still today. I was representing 100 families of miners, and the lawyer was representing the people still in their assets. That particular lawyer, Alejandro Moreno Proens, made an alliance with John W. Lill, my client, president of Barrick Chile, and in use of Minera Nevada S.A., Barrick Chile signs a contract with Alejandro Moreno Proens that rewards him very highly with 300 million, or thereabouts, 280 to be precise, for a toothpick of land, and we get $20 equivalent for 8,600 hectares. Villar did disappear, and when he confessed to me, I said, Villar, that contract is unconstitutional because it does not meet the minimum standards that is set out and set forth in Chilean legal jurisprudence and what pertains to the teachings of the contract of Alessandro Rodriguez and Alessandro Palma, some of the best, most gifted lawmakers in Chile. For a contract to be truth and valid, there has to be a part and a counterpart. And in this case, as you tell me, you were not counterpart to that contract. A contract to be valid in Chile under Chilean legislation and constitution, it has to have a serious price, something that is commensurate to the size of the asset that is being sold. And it was not meeting that requirement. I had Barrick Gold Corporation be notified by Page, Fraser and Associates, a company, a law firm here in Vancouver that was quarterbacking Murray Pessem against Lac Minerals in Ontario, Timmins, Ontario, and the Lac versus Corona case. And Larry Page, he clearly told me, Jorge, this is a Lac versus Corona all over the place and you have it hands down. That was his initial opinion. His opinion was later changed because Mr. Brian Mulroney's law firm, Torres law firm, threatened Larry Page. He was only one, Queen Counsel. Torres law firm at that time had 4 or 5. And he threatened Larry Page into compliance. And Brian was quite clear behind Barrick, and they said that I was libeling the company. Larry Page quit on me at the crucial moment when I had to defend the action in Chile. I did defend the action. What I did is I put a legal valid injunction in 2001 impeaching Barrick from entering the property or being able to use the property for any legal act or contract. From 2001 valid until today. The injunction is called Medida Prejudicial Precautoria, Prejudicial Precaution Measure C-1912-2001. And that is the only reason why Barrick Gold Corporation has not been able to deliver 18 million ounces of gold and 600 million ounces of silver to the establishment. That is the only reason why Barrick Gold has been operating in fraud to the Canadian banks, to the mutual funds, pension funds, to the stock exchanges, impersonating me and my assets. They have a false filing that they own Mina Pascua with a company in Chile called Minera Nevada S.p.A. Minera Nevada S.p.A. being the laundered company after they failed with Pascua Lama protocol with Minera Nevada Limitada, which is a launder company after they failed the Pascua ownership with Minera Nevada S.A. Barrick has been inventing itself in Chilean jurisdiction and in multiple jurisdictions with over 80 companies and making multiple joint ventures with everybody in the world over my asset. And they never owned it. They sued me in Canada and they took away my name, my reputation, and my livelihood. And in 2002, after I had levied the injunction C-1912-2001 against Barrick, and after I had levied criminal charges under case roll 1160-2002, Barrick Gold Corporation in December 2002 decides to take away my name in Canada and makes me an internet libel symbol. And it convinces the judges in Toronto that I had nothing to do with my asset, nothing to do with VR, nothing to do with Mina Pascua, and that on top of that, the areas that I was talking about didn't have anything to do with their project. And the impersonation took place, and Barrick started surrounding itself of the most powerful characters in the establishment, eliciting their participation and their active trampling of my rights, trampling of my business, trampling of every transaction, and stealing mining properties, assets, and transactions. Very well-known companies, juniors and senior, in the international mining establishment, including but not limited most of the members of the World Gold Council, most of the members of the TSX, and a number of members of other exchanges. Barrick still cannot deliver in Mina Pascua. Not even after 2009, they signed a new transaction to legitimize what they didn't own. I disputed the transaction with the BC Securities Commission regulators, especially Romulo Difonso, who had betrayed and deceived the ex-Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin Jr. When Mr. Paul Martin Jr. was Minister of Finance in 1998, 99, and 2000, thereabouts, he wrote me a letter and he told me that it was a very serious case where I had indicated, because it was. The man was right. And Mr. Paul Martin sent an RCMP delegation from Ottawa to interview me at the North Vancouver RCMP detachment. I delivered my deposition and I was requested and invited to keep working and collaborating with RCMP Commercial Crime Unit in 41st and Oak. Mr. Paul Martin Jr., as Honourable Minister of Finance, ascended to Right Honourable Prime Minister of Canada. And his father I met was a Bill of Parliament in April 2004. I was working with RCMP. I met Vancouver in January 2004 and filed 001 in BC and perhaps even in Canada. And they betrayed the file. Somebody did. The false testimonies are good enough to make the RCMP have failed. The false testimonies and phone calls from people, prominent individuals such as Brian Mulroney, had a lot to do with it, and the fact that my file was closed a month after Stephen Harper ascended to Prime Minister is not a coincidence. Mr. Stephen Harper, as Prime Minister, he went to Chile and drove against the traffic coming to Barrick offices through the back door to avoid the Chilean protesters, environmentalists. And Mr. Harper went up to Barrick's floor and started saying that Barrick was the greatest example for Canadian corporations. And that was an outright lie. He was lying to himself and to the public, because everybody else knows it to be different. But Mr. Harper, he had favors to pay to those ones who got him elected. He had favors to pay to those ones who went silent with the story. For me, as a Canadian citizen, I feel betrayed. I feel betrayed for the people who knew the story and didn't do nothing about it, such as Pamela Wallin and Mike Duffy, ex-reporters. They had the story. They just came out later on as senators for some reason or another. Prominent people like Mr. Harper, Mr. Mulroney, they knew the story. Mr. Mulroney knew that Barrick was defrauding the establishment, but he was happy with selling his stock in Barrick and getting even more. He didn't do the right thing and he had an option. Like he told Mr. Turner, the ex-Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Mulroney had an option not to deceive the RCMP and he did not do it. He's guilty of deception to the establishment and to the system, and he is guilty of traffic of influences, not only in Canada but in Chile and Argentina. The RCMP, after my file was closed in Vancouver, the RCMP reopened a new file in Ottawa. At this time, the file was for potential bribes paid by Barrick to the presidents of Chile and Argentina. Now that's grave, right there. Yet, the RCMP investigation went nowhere in Canada, in Argentina, because it involved the ex-husband of Cristina, Fernandez de Kirchner, Mr. Kirchner, and Bachelet didn't do a thing. to try to get Ricardo Lagos to own up to it. In fact, it's only through a recent 23rd civil court case that I was able to successfully, under arrest warrants and with police escort, to bring in the ex-president of Chile to declare. And what does he do? He actually tells a testimony that the government, in writing to the same court, was telling the opposite. They were trying to cover up. There is a cover-up here. But it's a cover-up that defeats everything that Canada stands for. It makes a mockery of democracy. And you are all there in the House of Commons, and you are all responsible for guarding this country. I told the House of Commons, because my emails don't lie. In fact, there is collusion. In fact, my emails are so consistent in the story since 2005 onwards that most of the politicians in Chile were served together with most of the politicians in Canada. And now they're all part of an investigation in Chile. And this is a criminal investigation, and it's also a civil investigation matter. What I need is for Canada, for once and for all, to stop Barrick. Because Barrick used to cost $59 its stock, and it went down to $7. Silver Wheaton used to cost near $60, and it went down to $11. Come on. That's pillage of the wealth of innocent investors. And how did it happen? It happened not only because of the permissiveness of the politicians. It happened because there was willing regulators in the stock exchange in Toronto and willing regulators in the BC Securities Commission, such as Romulo Difonso, to cover up for Barrick, to create excuses, deceive the RCMP and deceive the establishment. Romulo Difonso was notified in 2009 that Barrick did not own Pascua Lama, and that any business that they did with Silver Wheaton, it was against the law, and it was in fact a criminal act. Under section 400 brackets 1, he was peddling both of them a false prospectus, silver from Pascua Lama. I went farther. I told them that over my dead body they could deliver 1 ounce. And they never did. Both stocks collapsed. What did George Soros do? George Soros went and reinvested more money in Barrick to prop it up, and then sold that stock at a gain. Is this what Canada is all about? The corporate culture is rotted to the core. We've got to change that. And in order to cleanse this particular market fraud, it's easy. Confront Barrick Gold Corporation with the titles that it's peddling in the stock exchange today. Barrick filed in the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, in the New York Stock Exchange, and it has filed in the Toronto Stock Exchange under the Ontario Securities and Exchange Commission to be the rightful owner of Pascua Lama, the largest gold, silver, copper mine in the planet, with a company called Minera Nevada SPA, and some titles that they are called Tesoros concessions. Additional to that, they say that they own my concessions. Well, they never did. The Tesoros concession is and has been in my name since 2001 by judicial order and injunction. They have no permit to trespass. What Barrick did is they invented Lama. Lama, that there are moose pastures and guanaco pastures in Argentina, where the silver is encapsulated in limestone, and they put a $10 million request for metallurgical help. That's their Lama project. Lama is a fancy construction of a tunnel from Argentina to have metallurgical processing facilities in Argentina to steal the gold from Chile in rock form. So Pascua Lama is, let's steal the gold from Chile, from Mina Pascua, and let's carry it through a tunnel under the Andes and process it in Argentina as rocks. We don't tax in Chile because we got a new country called Pascua Lama. And we don't tax in Argentina because we only pay our workers whatever wages are due, and then we take the gold to fulfill our Ponzi scam. Because that's all Barrick has, a Ponzi scam. Racketeered Ponzi scam. Barrick cannot deliver 1 ounce of gold of the 18 million ounces of gold of my project Mina Pascua, Chile. Barrick cannot and did not deliver 1 ounce of silver to Silver Wheaton and will not deliver to the establishment 1 of my 600 million ounces of silver at Mina Pascua, Chile. I advise the government of Canada that we are proceeding with actions against the regulators of Canada, which will have to be deposed in Chile and deposed in Canada. And we are calling on the ex-Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney, for being a long-term officer of Barrick, that he knew all about it and did nothing to protect this country since 1996 onward. We are calling on Mr. Harper and on Mr. Nigel Wright, just to illustrate how Barrick had big people at the top, like they do have in Chile and Argentina. We are calling on John Baird, ex-Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, who had my files for years and did nothing to defend this country like he was requested, except for jumping from the illustrious government of Canada onto the rotted corporate group of Barrick Gold Corporation as the new executive in the rotted International Advisory Board of Barrick Gold Corporation. So this is a warning for Canada. You have another Bre-X in your hands, but this is real bad. A special consideration and thank you goes directly to the Right Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Justin Trudeau, for 2 things. Number 1, we feel proud of him for extending, like his father did before, his hand with honor and altruism to the First People of Canada. The people in Chile look very deeply and they feel highly respected by Canada in that sense. The second thing I'm proud of is that recently in the New York Times, an article cited and quoted our Right Honorable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as indicating that Canada will not stop at prosecuting, even if need be criminally, offending mining companies that they create environmental disasters or that they take away the good reputation of Canada. Thank you, Right Honorable Prime Minister. I want to tell you 2 things. Barrick Gold Corporation is acting in a predatory manner as you see this video in British Columbia, Canada. They have moved their operations and they are, through different corporations, in predatory practices, decimating the First Nations all across British Columbia. And I know that firsthand because I have projects with the First People, First Native nations, that they go into clean energy and they go into housing and development of their communities. And what do I find myself with the fact that Barrick Gold Corporation, directly or through subsidiaries, is creating the same damage that is done in Chile, in Argentina, and other countries, here in Canada, in BC. So all I can say is, heads up, Canada. We have a rotted apple in the box, which is called Barrick Gold Corporation. We have a culture of bribing politicians and abusing human rights and the environment, and that's called Barrick Gold Corporation. And I welcome the offer changes to be by our Right Honorable Prime Minister. And thank you. We are with you, sir.